Oren, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Igal. Happy to be here.
I'm super excited because my wife and I have this belief that we should never forget our ancestors. My grandfather, the great grandfathers, even to this day, my wife has a WhatsApp chat with like 28 people in New York, Israel, Mexico, where they're finding pictures and talking stories. And can you believe this? And can you believe that? And what you did, you took it a step further. You said, I heard this story. We'll talk about how you heard it from your grandfather, where you got the story from. And then you wrote the book about your grandfather surviving the Holocaust.
Yes.
Amazing.
By the way, I always thought this was a Jewish thing, right? Those WhatsApp groups with hundreds of people and cousins and nieces. But then after moving to the States, I now have friends from all sorts of amazing places. So my Gujarati friends from Mumbai, I mean, their WhatsApp groups are way bigger
I'm
than
sure.
mine. I mean,
I'm
their
sure.
families are way bigger. And so I don't think it's necessarily a Jewish thing, but it definitely exists where we come from.
100%.
Um, so yeah, absolutely. I think this is it's a cool observation and an important thing to focus on. Um, my grandfather raised me like a father. I lost my father at a very young age,
Mm.
and he was obviously, as a Holocaust survivor, he was scarred for life. Most of the Holocaust survivors that I've met or had the privilege of spending time with were one way or another scarred for life. He dealt with it in an extraordinary fashion. He was the quintessential optimist. He just spread optimism and good vibes and good thoughts everywhere. And I think that allowed him to expose me to every dirty detail of his past experiences and adventures from a very, very young age. So I lived his story growing up in Israel, and it always felt extremely personal and private to me. And we always talked about. I mean, he was eager to tell his story, and I remember inviting him to my third grade in Netanya in Israel, and he was telling the story, and the kids were, "Oh, that's amazing! That's awesome!" And I was always telling him, "Saba, Grandpa, we have to tell the story. It's an awesome story." And he always said, "Nah, there's so many stories. The fact that anyone who survived must have a crazy story because otherwise they would not survive. There's
Yeah.
too many stories. My story is not that different." And I always told him, "No, all these stories." Deserve to be told. I mean, there's a reason why we need to tell all these stories. We have to keep these stories alive, and someday you'll see. And he always said, "Nah, no one's going to read it. No one's going to care about it." When I saw him the last time in 2019 in Israel, he lived in Israel all his life after coming there during the Independence War. I told him that I intend at some point to do that. I've been telling him that for many, many years. And he said, "Nah, no one's going to read it, but you know what? I'll be very happy if you did." So, and then COVID came, which basically opened my window to catch up on my writing skills and sit down and write this incredible story.
Incredible. At what age did you realize that he was a Holocaust survivor? Was it just always known, or did you see things? What happened that you said, "Wait a second, Saba, you're a Holocaust survivor. Let's tell me a little bit about this."
Well, that's a great question. Um, I've always known he was a Holocaust survivor. I've always known that my grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, that both their parents were Holocaust survivors. And growing up with them, practically living in their house, it was very clear to me that everyone who was living in my town was a Holocaust survivor. And my shock came going to elementary school and finding out that most people around had not been descendants of Holocaust survivors, did not know Holocaust survivors. Only very few of them did. So that to me was a surprise. To us, um, talk of the Holocaust, of the olden days, of the people who were lost, who were gassed in the chambers, were like plain vanilla Friday night, Saturday like lunch discussions. I mean, it sounds weird, but that was reality, and in our home, people talked about that. Um, my grandfather was a sharing person. He liked sharing. He liked talking about it. My grandmother, less so. His mother, who lived to be over 100, and I also
Right.
recorded her during those years, also liked sharing a lot. And I was very curious. I always wanted to learn more. I asked them questions that challenged them. So, why did you choose to come to Israel after the war? Where are all the uncles and great uncles? Oh, they left to the States. Why? They left before the war to the States. Why? And I think part of the amazing journey that I went through when I sat down to write the book, and a few years before that, is with the genealogy revolution and the DNA revolution, you get to find out so many details. So I had some pieces of the puzzle from my grandfather, but most of the pieces of the puzzle I managed to collate in recent years doing all this research. And to me, some of those stories about where we come from, that little town in Czechoslovakia where you have 8 brothers and sisters, 4 of them lost in the Holocaust, 3 of them boarding a ship and go to Ellis Island, one of them going to a concentration camp and surviving. I mean, what made
Right.
these people make all these decisions? And sort of, you remember the movie Sliding Doors, like that's sort of a decision that changed the life of generations to come. All of a sudden, you come here. I've been living here, having a fantastic time in my adopting country over the last 18 years. You meet people that look like you, they sound like you, they're sort of your second cousins twice removed. Their great grandfather boarded that ship in 1914,
Mm.
and they lived a great life in Ohio or in California. But basically, they started in the same house.
Wow. Incredible. What happened? We'll get into the story a little bit, and I want people to read the book, obviously. But what happened as you were writing the book? What were the feelings, the emotions that came out? And also, just so that we have some clarity, did you write the book while he was alive, or did he pass and then you decided to write the book?
So I've been recording him for decades. So
Hmm.
the story itself has been brewing for decades. But I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a businessman. I don't have time. I have an amazing family, I'm an amazing wife and 2 daughters, and life is hectic. And this whole, I mean, you know that, right? I don't need to
I,
tell
ha-
you.
I have 3 daughters. So.
Oh, fantastic. So you're even busier than I am. So I had this story in me, and I knew that I had to find the medium to tell it. I never had the time. Um, he passed in right after COVID hit, and he died in isolation, and I was far away, and
Mm.
I couldn't even fly to Israel to attend his funeral, which was like a COVID funeral. Very sad. Um, and around the same time, businesses closing, furloughing all the employees. You sit at home with a nice bottle of bourbon. You sort of need to make decisions for what's happening next. What are you going to do? And to me, it dawned on me that everything happens for a reason, right?
Yeah.
So my reason for COVID was this. So 3 days after we shut down our Manhattan location, I basically enrolled into a high intensity writing class that focused
Mm.
on biographies, autobiography. I'm not an author, right? I've never written a book. I always liked writing. I have an artistic side, but for a few weeks, I took on writing and I wrote a lot, and I had people critique my writing, and I sort of built my muscle and toolkit to write, and I started playing back all those hours of recordings, his
Like you,
recordings,
you
his
sat
mom's
there,
recordings.
you sat there with like a tape recorder recording him?
So early on, he was an entrepreneur. He sort of was crazy about electronics. He used to
Okay.
travel to Japan all over the place starting in the 60s. So he used to bring me all these analog recording
Mm.
devices. And early on as a kid, I would record him. So those devices no longer exist. Later on in the 90s, I sort of used better devices that are again to record him. Now it's all digitized and sort of structured and
Nice.
and properly documented. But I played all these digital files of him telling the story. I played the digital files of his mom telling her story, like the turn of the last century. Um, and it took me a few weeks until I built my confidence and I started sitting down and writing. And I think the first big decision I had to make is whether I'd write it in English or Hebrew. English is not
Mm.
my first language. I still dream in Hebrew, and I do most of my reading, leisure reading in Hebrew. But it became very apparent to me that I want to tell this story in English because I come from my homeland. I mean, everyone is immersed in the Holocaust and the memory, and we all know all these people, and the level of consciousness and awareness and importance of telling the stories and commemorating the bravery of the survivors is there. And I felt that it would make more sense to tell the story here.
Gotcha.
The book is going to be published in Hebrew in Israel later this year, but I really wanted to share it with my community here. I live in Brooklyn. I love Brooklyn. We have so many friends, Jews, non-Jews, people like-minded from everywhere in one of the best places in the world. It was important to me to tell them the story.
Amazing. I want to go back really quick. I wrote this down because you said that he was extremely positive. And there's a lot of Holocaust, or there were Holocaust survivors that just kind of were depressed, down, lost it all, just negative. What do you think made him positive? And how did he show you how to live a positive life?
Well, it was a survival mechanism, right? A survival apparatus. When you listen to the tapes and you sort of understand what these people went through, and none of us have the ability to actually feel or understand what they went through, hell on earth. You had to reinvent yourself when you were after you've been liberated. You had to explain to yourself what had happened and give yourself a reason to continue living. And obviously, history has a lot of sad tales of survivors who just couldn't find the will to continue. It was just too much for them to bear. I think he was extremely successful in creating this separation between those memories and between the emotions surrounding these memories in a very practical life. And he managed to shut himself out of the emotional memory of a 17-year-old in a camp, and witnessing the loss of most of his family, and the need to provide for his family to live a respectable life. And our household was extremely non-emotional, and he was leading that charge. And I mean, we didn't cry and we didn't talk about this with a lot of emotion. And the person who really connected me to the emotional side of all this was my life partner. And I'm sort of I make that point in the book. I think that he was scarred for life, like many survivors, and he raised scarred generations after him. And I think that in many ways, the third generation has an easier time dealing with it, with a family history, talking about it, sharing it, telling the story. And I think it's not a coincidence that you see a lot of storytelling happening today, led by third generations in the States, in Israel, in France, in the UK, because these are all stories that have remained with the families. And in many ways, it made sense to tell them after the survivors had passed.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, when you hear these stories of strength, for example, my grandfather in Turkey, he was like 93 years old before he passed. Went to his house one time, and he was telling me a story about how they were saving Jews who would cross from Europe into Turkey, right? He was in a little village on the border, and in the middle of the night, they had, horse carriages, and they'd put him in the horse carriages, and they'd cross him over the border illegally. And I said, Buk Baba, that's what I call him. Is that, why didn't you say anything? So I feel like you're extremely lucky that your grandfather spoke, that he shared, and that you were smart enough to listen and to record. I think that's brilliant. So kudos to you on that.
And just one point on heritage. You coming from Turkey, I come from Czechoslovakia. I must say that, and I get no offense to my Czechoslovakian friends, they're lacking in their culinary sort of heritage.
Yeah, yeah.
What you in Turkey, I honestly, that just incredible. I would have loved to get myself connected to that heritage.
Just a side note, I married an Ashkenazi Jew, and
That's
and
okay.
yeah, I know. You can make mistakes. No, I'm
Me
kidding.
too.
She's
Yeah.
amazing. And I took her to Turkey, and I said, listen, it's not because I have Turkish pride and Turkish. I said, this is the best food you're going to ever eat, hands down, hands
Of
down.
course. Of
And she
course.
left, and she said, that's it. Like I'm not going to make borscht or any of that stuff. We're going to learn how to make Turkish food. And I was like, I won the battle.
Yeah, you go to the Grand Bazaar and you just sit there and oh, So
So
good.
good, so good, amazing, man. So tell us a little bit about your grandfather. In the pre-show, you talked that his name in the book was Alex Rosenberg, but that wasn't the name that he passed away with. So give us where he was in the Czech Republic, how it happened, and give us a synopsis of what readers are going to read when they pick up the book.
Right. So I'm gonna be careful not to spoil because
Don't.
this story has its highs and lows and big, big surprises. Although again, the punch is he makes it out, right? He survives. So I spoiled that. Alexander was born in 1927 in Czechoslovakia. And again, that region of the world, you remember that joke about the Jew that sort of traveled to 7 countries in the 20th century without leaving his home. That's a story. That's an area that was the Austro-Hungarian regime, and then it was Czechoslovakia, and then it was Slovakia, and then it was Third Reich, and then it was.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they shifted ownership, living in the eastern part of Slovakia. He was born to a very affluent, sort of socially involved family, um, of Jews that were not very religious. We're not Orthodox, even though his grandfather was a no, it was his great grandfather was a very famous ultra Orthodox Ashkenazi rabbi. So he was born to an ancestry of important Orthodox rabbis. His father is a trader. He owns like a specialty department store that's sort of central to the district, and um, they live a very pampered, very comfortable life. And you sort of see, as the 1930s draw to an end, the rise of the Nazi Party, the rise of fascism all around Europe, and the slow deterioration of the loss of rights to own property, the loss of the ability to move freely and arrange freely, and sort of how everything escalates and becomes chaotic until it comes to violence, and how highly affluent, highly educated, highly connected people that feel extremely confident and comfortable and secure in their life lose everything. Um, and I think this is something he took with him. And again, the story there becomes a cat and mouse game. The Rosenbergs against the Gestapo, who wins? Sort of, it's an interesting path. I think that it's purposely told in an accessible way. Initially, it was very important to me to tell it the way that he would tell it,
Yeah.
that he would come to my elementary school, my middle school, my high school, as he did throughout the years, and told it in a way that is accessible. There are many Holocaust stories. I read many Holocaust stories. Some of them are very difficult to read. I think this one is not, and that's the purpose. And my amazing daughter Rio, who's an American, unlike me, and speaks proper English and writes in proper English, helped me and sort of was my um, litmus test to really make sure that I'm writing this in a way that would not antagonize or hurt the feelings of people reading it. Initially, I thought that it would be aimed at young adults, but as I was writing it and letting people around experience it, they all said, "No, this is just for everyone." So not going to spoil anything else.
Good. Don't. Because if it's one thing I do enjoy is I love reading books on the Holocaust just to be able to see not the pain, but the strength of people. The incredible strength, mental, physical, emotional, faith, whatever it is that got them through to the end.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the points here is that he was a young man. He was 17.
Mm,
And I think that the kind of things that you do, the bravery, the stupidity, right? What you have at 17 allows you to do things that older people who are much more calculated, risk averse would not do. And part of the reason they made it out is that he was 17.
mm,
He was talented and he had much at stake. He had the life of his father in his hands. He had his mother who was separated and was taken to a different camp that he really wanted to reunite with. But his youth and his energy, there was a function of his youth is very central to this story and is very central to his survival.
when we talk about strength, this came into my mind. Do you think that in today's day and age, Jewish men, after you hearing what your grandfather went through, there's that famous saying of, good times create weak men, or like hard times create strong men create easy times, and easy times create weak men. Do you feel that that's the case today? You listened to your grandfather's story, you wrote it, 17, bravery, strength, doing what he did to survive. Do you think our youth are even close to having that strength
I
today?
agree. Unfortunately, I agree 100%. Um, Look, I'm an orphan from a very young age who grew up with a Holocaust survivor grandfather in a country that in the early 1980s or late 70s when I grew up was, I don't know if it was third world or two and a half or second world, was sort of a developing country with very, very little infrastructure and no wealth or affluence whatsoever. And I think it made life easier for me. And raising an amazing family here in the States, my biggest fear is becoming a helicopter parent and sort of pampering and not allowing them to fail. When my daughters come home crying because they had a terrible day and a very difficult challenge, I go aside and when they don't see me, I do something like, "Oh my God, you can't buy this. This is amazing. This is great. All these challenges or these failures." I mean, these failures make them stronger people. They make them more independent. Obviously, I hope no one needs to go through the Holocaust again to become stronger and more immune and more successful in dealing with challenges. But I'm a true believer in allowing kids to fail and to, I mean, experience hardship. Otherwise, they're going to have a very difficult life.
Did you grow writing this book? Like before you wrote the book, you had all the stories and you grew up with your grandfather, you published the book, it came out. Was there growth in you because of this writing? And not just because you became a better writer, but internally?
That's a first. No one has asked me that question. I'm sure I did. At the very basic level, the book was published 2 weeks ago, and I've been receiving incredible phone calls, texts, and people reaching out to me to talk about the book and talk about my experience writing it. I never thought I was going to write a book. I never thought I was going to speak to other people about a book that I wrote. So that in itself is a humbling experience that I'm enjoying immensely. That's amazing. Um, I think that um, a lot of things, including work, including other things, I assign a different weight to after writing this book and going through this experience. And I don't know if it's an age thing or a maturity thing or a post-COVID era type of thing. So it's difficult to separate. Um, but I definitely I feel a much stronger connection to my heritage for sure. And telling the story, I've always felt very connected to him and to where we come from in the story. But I think that this sort of forced me or allowed me to reach out to other family members that I've never been in contact with, that are descendants of the great uncles and people who left. Um, I was always intrigued by, and I mentioned it before, the sliding doors. You leave Europe and you go to the States, you leave Europe and you go to Palestine, later Israel, and how does your life pan out as a result? The experience or the ability to experience the fact that there's Jewish life that is very different across the Atlantic, different communities, different values, different priorities. They're all amazing, but they're very different, and we share the same DNA, but our life experiences and um, are very, very different. Again, it's very humbling for me coming from Israel and enriching at the same time.
Incredible. I want to go into just really quickly the publishing process. Did you self-publish or is it with a publisher?
So the book was published by Amsterdam Publishers, the largest European-based publisher for historical and Holocaust books, led by an incredible woman, Lisbeth Henk, based in Amsterdam. She has made it her I'm speaking on her behalf now. Her life quest to make as many of these stories told,
Mm.
um, and she's amazing. I initially wrote the book. I sent it around to people that I thought could allow me to connect with the industry. I don't know anyone in the literary world or publishers, etc. And I worked with a couple of publishers who were looking at the book and thinking about publishing it, but something didn't feel right, and I researched and I found Lisbeth, and I sent her the book, and 48 hours later she wrote me back, "We're definitely publishing this book. I mean,
Amazing.
let's just do it. It's just it's the right book at the right time to the right audience. We have to publish it." So again, I can't tell you that it was like months of effort, and because it wasn't. I think it was just good research and a lot of luck and timing. And sometimes you have good timing, some you have bad timing. This book had the right timing and the right research behind it, and the partnership with Lisbeth was just incredible.
I think your grandfather was helping you out, right? Just
Oh, absolutely.
find the resources and
He's
the
still helping me
connections.
out. I mean, I can hear his voice as we speak now. He's making jokes in the background.
Amazing, Oren. This has been incredible. For those of you who are listening, guys, go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere where books are sold. It's called The Apprentice of Buchenwald. I think it's extremely important to remember the lost, those people who went and suffered, especially in the Holocaust, because we live life so easy these days, and to forget those who gave so much just for us to be here, I think is a shame. So, Oren, it's been a pleasure. Like we say on the show, Chazak v'matz, strength and courage. Thank you for doing what you did with the book, and I hope it has massive success worldwide.
Toda rabba, Igal. Great spending time with you. Thank you.
Likewise. And everybody stay tuned for the next episode of the Tribesmen podcast. Take care.